Hello and welcome everyone to another one of my The Flash Season 3 videos. Now in this video I'll be discussing two things. First I'll be looking at everything Savitar said during his communications with Team Flash through Julian, and what it means for his identity, and how Garrick has a chance at being Savitar. I'll go further as well and include theories dropped by commenters on my previous Flash video with regards to Savitar's identity. But before discussing that as well, it seems we've made one assumption all the way through that might not hold true at the end of the day. We'll assume that Savitar has to be a man. Maybe it is the Thawne Bell voice, or just the fact that whenever we think of speedster villains, most of those who happen to come to mind happen to be of the male kind. But there is also the distant possibility that Savitar is no guy and could actually be a female speedster. But what about the Thawne Bell voice? Well, we know Barry happens to modulate his voice. Hunter Zolomon had a totally different voice and costume, and up until the very end, even after we found out who happens to be under the costume of Zoom. Prometheus and Arrow had a completely different voice than Adrian Chase, and so did Julian Albert as Alchemy. We do know as well that the character behind the suit of armor is not portrayed by Thawne Bell. There would be no big reveal if that were to be the case. So it's kind of possible a woman is behind the suit of armor Savitar is wearing, and her voice is modulated into this male voice in order not to reveal her identity. But let's head right into discussing everything we know so far about Savitar and what it means if we were to take his words at face value.
1.
So in the 9th episode, Savitar addresses Barry, probably with regards to those available in the room. Caitlin, Cisco, Joe, Wally, Iris, HR, and possibly Julian, whom he happens to be communicating through when he gives them his prophecy. One shall betray you, one shall fall, one will suffer a fate far worse than death. Now, considering Garrick was around in Star Labs for that episode as well, I'll count him in as one of the individuals possibly affected by the prophecy. So we do know that Iris is the one who shall fall. We have no confirmation so far on who it is that shall betray Barry, and as for suffering a fate far worse than death, we assumed initially it was Wally when he got trapped in the Speed Force on the 15th episode, but now with the events of the 16th episode, it's kind of probable it is Garrick. Now that of course does not negate it could still be Wally or anyone else for that matter. Now considering Garrick sacrificed himself willingly on the 16th episode, taking Wally's place, he might have ended up losing it in there, and as a result started believing Barry should have stopped him from taking Wally's place, thus blaming Barry for letting him spend eternity in the Speed Force. But I'll get back to that in a moment here.
2.
So in the very same episode, Savitar identified himself to Barry as the future and told him he took everything from him, that he wants it back and that he will take it all back before he destroys Barry. Now in explaining this statement, he does tell Barry that his future self trapped him in eternity, which we know now for a fact is the Speed Force. This as well happens to apply or work with what happened to Garrick on the 16th episode, titled Into the Speed Force, considering how Barry, one moment, 1 second, 1 day after having this conversation could easily be considered a future version of himself. And that's exactly what happened there. A future version of Barry left Garrick behind within the Speed Force.
3.
Now on the second Savitar storytelling session through Julian, which happened on the 15th episode of the season titled The Wrath of Savitar, he tells Barry that he's nothing like him, that Barry is cruel and selfish, and that he's the villain from his perspective. Interestingly enough, this could go both ways. Barry could have done wrong by this person, hurt him in a way. In case of Garrick, the cruelty referred to here could be about leaving him behind in the Speed Force, and the selfishness could be referring to him giving Wally priority over him because he's some sort of family. But then again, that does not necessarily mean he is most definitely Garrick. He could just be a typical villain, someone terrible who believes he's doing the right thing because, well, no one believes they are ever wrong. It's part of our human nature. Now when Savitar addresses HR on the very same episode, he informs him that the sad thing is that he lives through all of this, that the coward that he is survives his wrath, which means HR is possibly the person who betrays them, but definitely not the one to suffer a fate far worse than death.
4.
On the 15th episode as well, Savitar tells Barry that he created himself, which as I mentioned in last week's video could refer to a multitude of characters, but specifically to Wally, maybe Julian, and possibly Barry, who did get his speed back after being robbed of it by Zoom, by getting himself hit by lightning and spending an entire episode within the Speed Force. But what if it all applies to Jay Garrick as well? I mean, we have no confirmed origin story for Jay Garrick on the show, so possibly his powers were self-induced. But if we're really looking for a good twist, there was someone else who gave himself his own powers and would create a similar narrative to Barry being the one under the suit of armor. That would be Malcolm Thawne, but they would then need to create a variation of his character from the comics, so he would end up being Savitar instead of Cobalt Blue, or maybe even on a future season we would discover he was Cobalt Blue before he became Savitar. After all, the stolen at birth twin of Barry's, that is Malcolm, induced his own abilities by mixing his hatred for Barry with the talisman owned by the Thawne family. But anyway, Savitar in the very same episode also goes to tell the team that they made him who he is, the way he is, did this to him, that he never asked for any of it, and that they meet pretty soon, and that they will be there when he becomes who he is. Now again, this statement could go two ways. It could mean that Barry will be there when the man gets his speed, which would most definitely mean he's neither Wally, nor Jay, nor Barry, because all three of them have gotten their speed already. Or it could also mean that Barry will be there for his transformation from some good law-serving, nice speedster to the man in the suit of armor.
5.
Now there's also this theory that was pointed out in a comment on my previous video on the topic about how future Barry could be Savitar, besides of course all that I've mentioned, including the message he left Rip Hunter from the future on Legends of Tomorrow, and which we ended up listening to on the mega crossover event this season. So Gary's comment indicated it would kind of make sense if Barry was Savitar, considering his latest experience within the Speed Force meeting Robbie and Eddie. The theory Gary presented is about the lesson that was taught to Barry within the Speed Force by both of them about sacrifice. He then continued to explain how that would lead Barry to realizing what it is that he needs to do, possibly sacrificing himself to save everyone else by the end of the season, with him being Savitar and all. Of course, he did as well mention that this would end up being the cliffhanger of the season finale, that Barry wouldn't really die, he'd just vanish, disappear, and they'd have to work on finding him or getting him back on the next season. But he also supports his theory with the fact that by the end of the most recent episode, Barry seems to be pulling away from Iris, which can be noticed in the very final scene in his conversation with her, telling her that they need some space for a while. Now the theory is pretty plausible, because coming to think about it, we can also add Leonard Snart to the list, whom he also met in the Speed Force, and who as well happened to have sacrificed himself for similar reasons on the first season of Legends of Tomorrow, and he did actually tell Barry that he was inspired by him in deciding to sacrifice himself.
6.
Let's sum up a few things here. Savitar thinks he's a god. He claims Barry trapped him in the Speed Force, that he had to find someone to replace him in order to be freed of his imprisonment. He tells Barry he will be there for his transformation, that he happened to have given himself his own speed, and that Barry is the villain in all of this. Eddie also tells Barry on the 16th episode that his future self happens to have created this prison within the Speed Force that held Savitar. Hence Barry might have been the one as well who have created the requirement that in order for Savitar to leave, he has to get replaced by another speedster, in an attempt to make sure Savitar never manages to leave. Now this is kind of where it gets complicated with the theory that Jay Garrick is Savitar. Jay Garrick did replace Wally in the Speed Force, but at that point, Barry never really created the prison for Jay Garrick, which is the only link that is missing to put Garrick in the race for Major Villain of the Season.
7.
One other person I kind of thought of recently happens to be the Accelerated Man from HR's Earth. We were promised we would see him on the second half of the season, which we kind of did momentarily, and if the show does anything with speedsters, it is that it gives them a lot of screen time. However, that could be either a spot-on speculation or one that is very far-fetched. We know the guy is out there and part of the show's multiverse, so it is not too difficult to see him become part of the whole thing. The man's beef might be with HR, a choice that HR made or would make that would mess up his Earth, ending up with Barry jumping to his defense or protection, leading down the road to the Accelerated Man becoming this supervillain. I mean, that is not how it would go down. I'm not a writer on the show, so I don't have to be that good making up the stories here, but I'm just giving a simple example of an arc off the top of my head here. What if the Blight on Earth 19, HR's home, got even worse and his people came invading Earth 1 with the Accelerated Man leading the march? And again, shit happened and it got to the point where he became Savitar. Now one very important reason this could be very far-fetched is that the whole thing wouldn't create any kind of dramatic effect. The dramatic effect we've all been anticipating and expecting to come along with the reveal of the man behind the giant metal suit. And it isn't just the fact that we've been anticipating it here, but the show as well happens to have been feeding it to us and building up towards it.
8,
Now, with regards to my speculation on last week's video on the topic about how HR is a suspect in being the man behind the suit of armor, there were a couple of reasons, like the fact he's a stranger, he refers to Wally as Wallace, just like Alchemy did and Savitar does. But here's one other thing yet another commenter on my previous video, Sky Blue, reminded me of. He did make a point towards HR not being HR, not being a Harrison Wells at all. So forget about the voice modulators that most of the speedsters on the show seem to be using, and think about the face modulator HR has on his person. What if the Harrison Wells face he's using is just a fake? What if he's someone else, someone completely different? What if fake Wells, in Savitar's words, is more fake than we know he is? It is true he might have been on the building behind Savitar when Barry got vibed into the future, but what if he's Savitar's partner in crime? It could be a plausible theory, only I'd say here that he wouldn't have revealed Savitar's weakness when he had Jesse quick stab him if he were. Even better, he wouldn't have gone the extra mile of telling everyone about Savitar's weakness after Jesse has left. After all, no one could have known about it and everything could have went on fine.
9,
Now let's leave the identity of Savitar behind for a moment and talk Wally West. So there are 4 routes I could see Wally's arc taking going forward. He could end up moving to Earth 2 and living happily ever after with Jesse, apprehending Earth 2 criminals and metahumans. Or he ends up becoming Savitar, or he could die before the second season is over, and considering each season ends up having this one major death in the final couple of episodes, it is kind of possible. But finally he could somehow end up losing his speed with the defeat of Savitar. So Wally's been gaining speed rapidly, rapid enough for everyone to believe he would soon be faster than Barry, and the show won't be able to handle Kid Flash being faster and better than the Flash. After all, it would kill the whole "my name is Barry Allen and I'm the fastest man alive" intro of the show, turning Barry into the sidekick soon enough. As a result, I don't see his arc playing out of the realm of the 4 options I just listed.
10,
So the option that Savitar could be just this man of metal with no human form is no more a possibility, considering the vulnerability Jesse found when she stabbed him with his own blade-like finger, so that one is out of the window. Now I believe the alchemist stone in the box happened to be Savitar's prison. That is how the condition to keep him in the Speed Force, unless replaced by another speedster, was created and is being met. So if I were to be right here, I think that future Barry would have traveled back in time to the past and hid the box where Julian ended up finding it in some sort of attempt to imprison Savitar forever. The whole Savitar arc as well has a few holes here and there that I'm going to talk about probably in a future video, but this narrative would most definitely reduce the amount of holes in the story. Also worth mentioning here, and before I end this video, is a theory mentioned by one of my commenters stating Savitar is actually Edward Clariss, aka the Rival. Now I'm not really the biggest fan of this theory, considering we know Savitar killed him, but who's to say that was not a twist? I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. Stranger things have happened on the show, and I'm not one to shoot down a theory completely. Besides, Clariss is big on the pages of the comics, big enough to be the nemesis of Jay Garrick, so you never know. But with that being said, let me know in the comments who you think Savitar happens to be and what led you to that choice. And remember to drop me a like if you like the content on this video, and to subscribe if you want to see more of the Flash videos on What the Geek. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon.